Good to see you all. Thanks for coming today. This is the service where I'm going to tell you the truth. Tell you all about the truth. And don't worry, I got it. Now I set the bar really high. Okay. So let's begin with a short reading from the Jewish tradition. This reading comes from the vast and amazing and detailed set of laws and commentary on those laws known as the Talmud. This is just a brief story from the Talmud. There was once a great debate between the two most important and influential schools of religious thought. The school of Shammai, who was a great teacher, and the school of Hillel, who was also a great teacher. And this debate concerned a particular point of religious law. Now, the school of Shammai insisted that its perspective was the truth, that they had the Word of God, while the school of Hillel stated with equal conviction that its perspective was the truth and the Word of God. Both sides believed they were right. Both sides believed they were speaking the truth. Finally, after many months and years of disagreement and dispute, a voice came down from heaven, you can imagine who that was, and said, both arguments, the argument of the school of Shammai and the argument of the school of Hillel, are true. They are both the Word of God. But it is the school of Hillel that prevails in the argument, for it has stated the true Word of God. Now, as you can imagine, a member of the house of Shammai looked up and raised this question. Well, if both arguments are the Word of God, how is it that the school of Hillel prevails? And here's what the voice said in reply. The school of Hillel prevails because in making their argument, they have been humble, open, and kind-hearted, and have studied and even included the arguments of the house of Shammai in making their own. Here ends our reading from the Talmud. So, the truth. Here we go. Strap on your seatbelts. So I want to begin this morning, and I'm going to divide the sermon up into two parts. So this is part one. I guess you figured that out. So I want to begin this morning by sharing with you what has to be one of the most frequently heard statements that is made about our religious tradition, Unitarian Universalism. And what's interesting about this statement is that it is offered by some as a reason to celebrate Unitarian Universalism, why Unitarian Universalism is really great and wonderful. While the exact same statement is sometimes made by those for whom we are not their cup of tea, to point out that there's something deeply wrong with us. The same statement. Here it is. In Unitarian Universalism, you can believe whatever you want. Okay, now I want to ask you guys a question. Who here has heard that statement before? Who here has made that statement before? Right, exactly. Perfect, great. So, now I think it's fair to say, for those who offer these words in a positive light as a compliment, Unitarian Universalism is really all about individual freedom. The freedom of the individual to seek, to explore, to question, and to believe what your heart and mind tell you is true. And the freedom that is at the heart of our faith is perhaps best exemplified by the fact that Unitarian Universalism, unlike many other faith traditions, lacks a creed or a single test of faith that one must accept in order to be a UU. Now, here's the flip side. For those who offer this same statement as a critique of Unitarian Universalism, I think it's fair to say that they view religions like ours as being far too individualistic and subjective. The absence of a creed, which we use, I think, for the most part, view as a very positive strength, is in fact a glaring flaw and weakness. Because people need to anchor their lives in some kind of overarching certainty and truth about the meaning and purpose of existence. Now, I've really set the table well here to launch into one of my, typical UU sermons. Freedom, good. Creeds, bad. I've preached that sermon before, and undoubtedly you'll hear it again in the future. But I want to go at things a little bit differently today. Rather than simply doing a cheerleading and celebration session for our commitment to religious freedom and our rejection of creeds and doctrines, I want to explore what you might say are the philosophical or even theological roots of our approach to religion, and especially our understanding of what exactly is religious truth. Too often, I think, in Unitarian Universalism, we skip this step. Instead, jumping right to the we don't like creeds and we can believe whatever we want without ever taking the time to understand what we're talking about. So here we go. So what exactly is religious truth? Where does it come from? Is there just one truth, many truths, or no truth at all? And why exactly do we Unitarian Universalists reject creeds? Is it because we simply don't agree with the specific content of existing creeds? If they just write a good one, we'd accept that one. Or is there something about creeds in general that just doesn't fit with our understanding of the nature and meaning of religious truth? Well, as we consider these questions, I want to begin with that little story I read to you a few minutes ago. I first encountered it in a class that I took way back in seminary on the history and development of the Jewish tradition. Man, this was a really, really great class. In that class, we learned about the Torah and the Talmud. We learned about the vast body of Jewish law known as Halakha, and about fascinating mystical traditions like Kabbalah and Hasidism. But I have to say that if there is one thing that really stood out for me about that class, and that has enriched not simply my knowledge of the Jewish tradition, which it certainly did, but especially my understanding of our own Unitarian Universalism, it is the way in which Judaism and the Jewish tradition approach the search for religious truth and meaning. So let me tell you more about that. In that story we heard, a legal dispute between two schools of thought has been going on for quite some time. God eventually resolves the dispute by deciding that while both sides have made arguments that are true, one side prevails because it has made its arguments with humility and goodwill and has listened to and learned from the truths contained in the arguments made by the other side. Now let's think for a minute about what this story is telling us about truth. Truth is not found exclusively in just one argument, in just one belief, or on just one side of the question. Rather, truth emerges in the interaction of different ideas and diverse perspectives. God rules on behalf of the house of Hillel because while the other side only listened to themselves and to their own ideas, the house of Hillel listened to and learned from the wisdom of the other. That is the path to truth. And as I came to learn in that wonderful class, this spirit of ongoing and continuous argument and commentary, listening and learning and conversation. This is at the heart of the Jewish understanding of religious truth. While Judaism recognizes and affirms the sanctity and sacredness of the Torah, the truth in the text only emerges out of continuous exploration and interpretation of its meaning. That is why so much of the Jewish tradition is a vast and voluminous, and I mean voluminous, dialogue among different voices and commentators. A dialogue that both reveals the truth as it is understood at that particular moment in time, and a dialogue that is always laying the groundwork for future generations to develop new truths and new ways of understanding God, the world, and ourselves. In Judaism, the search for the truth and the conversation out of which truth emerges never ends. Now, I have a quick slide here. You know me, I can't avoid doing little slideshows. Let's see, is my laser pointer working? Is that? Yeah, there it is. This is a page from the Talmud. Now, it's all in Hebrew. I don't read Hebrew, so I can't possibly tell you what it says. But what's so interesting about this is that contained on this single page is a number of voices and commentaries. Here is the text in this little box right here of the point of law that is being discussed. Right below it is the initial commentary that was done in between the 3rd and 5th centuries by the rabbis of the time, and that has been handed down to generations. But that's not, so we have the text and the commentary, but that's just the beginning. On this side, we have the commentary from the great medieval Jewish scholar Rashi, whose commentaries were probably the most influential in the history of Judaism. On the other side, we have the commentary of a group of scholars who came after Rashi, and then in these notes along the side are subsequent commentaries. The point is that this, it's not just, you don't just produce the text, it's the conversation around the text. And it's not enough to just say, oh yeah, here's the text and you can go look the rest up. It's all part of it. This is where the truth is. It's not just in the original, it's in the conversation. And this is what I find so powerful and so moving and so inspiring about what I'm calling the Jewish approach, Judaism's approach to the search for religious truth. And it is this understanding of an approach to religious truth that inspires the title of today's sermon, A River or a Rock. For those faith traditions that are rooted in a single creed, I think it's fair to say that religious truth resembles something like a rock, solid, unmoving, and unchanging. Truth is like a piece of property that one faith can claim and own to the exclusion of others. But for traditions like Judaism and, as I will argue in part 2 of the sermon, Unitarian Universalism, religious truth is much more like a river of continuous and ongoing revelation, interpretation, and conversation. A river that never stops moving and that is always creating great and profound truths out of the interaction of countless ideas and voices and experiences and stories. It's never ending. Religious truth, therefore, can never be fully or definitively found in just the words of one person, one sacred text, or even one religion, because truth is always emerging, unfolding, always carrying us along a marvelous journey of discovery and exploration. Our next reading comes from a Unitarian Universalist minister, a colleague, the Reverend David Blanchard, and it's called A Larger Tapestry of Meaning. There is room on our path for any person who seeks a more complete understanding of what is true and good in life. The answers cannot be found if you ask only men. They can't be found if you ask only Christians. They can't be found if you only ask gays and lesbians. They can't be found if you only ask yourself. The answers come from listening to people of great diversity and weaving their small truths into a larger tapestry of meaning. So, in part one of this morning's sermon, I hopefully successfully distinguished between these two approaches to religious truth. This rock or property model, which sees truth as being a single belief or set of beliefs that are eternal and unchanging, that belong exclusively to only one religion, and the river, the more pluralistic model, that sees religious truth as moving and as a moving and evolving reality that emerges out of the interaction among a wide variety of influences and ideas, experiences and stories, conversation and dialogue. And it is this understanding of religious truth that informs Unitarian Universalism. From our beginnings almost 500 years ago during the Protestant Reformation, right up to the present day, Unitarian Universalism has been rooted in an understanding of truth that is open, continuous, pluralistic, and diverse. We see truth as living in and emerging out of all things and all people. Religious truth surely lives in sacred books, like the Torah, the Christian Bible, the Quran, and the Bhagavad Gita. Religious truth also lives in the rhythms, regularities, and processes of nature in the universe. Religious truth lives in the words and deeds of prophetic and spiritual leaders like Jesus of Nazareth, Gandhi, Mother Teresa. Religious truth lives in the creative imagination. It lives in music, in the visual arts, and in works of literature and poetry. And religious truth most assuredly lives in all of you, in your experiences, in your stories, your joys and sorrows, your hopes and your dreams. There is no limit, no end, no boundary or barrier privileging one source of truth over another. In Unitarian Universalism, truth lives in and is revealed in everything. I don't know if many of you are familiar with what is called the living tradition of Unitarian Universalism. This living tradition is our list of 6 sources of religious and spiritual truth that are lifted up as being especially important for Unitarian Universalists. You guys familiar with that? These sources are in the hymnal. Here they are on the screen. I've shortened them a little bit so that the font wouldn't get too small, so that you'd be able to see it. These are the 6 sources. Now, it's important to note about this list that it isn't complete or exhaustive. No perfect or all-inclusive list exists or can ever fully be written in Unitarian Universalism. But what matters most is not how complete or exhaustive our list of sources is or can be. Rather, what matters most is that the river is always flowing, always moving, always revealing even new sources, new currents, new streams, new ideas, new values, and new truths. And it is this reality of truth as evolving and emerging out of the diversity of life and conversation that explains why we Unitarian Universalists do not have a creed or a single dogma. We believe that reality is simply too diverse, too mysterious, too complex, and too dynamic to be captured by simply one statement, by one belief, by one text, or even by one religion. Our problem with creeds isn't that they are wrong. A creed, in fact, is one more source of spiritual truth and wisdom in Unitarian Universalism. Our problem with creeds is that they are absolute and not reflective of the dynamism and diversity that is built into creation. With a creed, truth is final and the conversation is closed. In Unitarian Universalism, truth is never final and the conversation never ends. And that leads me back to that statement that I started the service with this morning. Unitarian Universalism being a religion in which you can believe anything you want. I think in many ways that our commitment to truth as an always unfolding and ever-flowing river, to truth as the living product of the interaction of so many sources and of an unending conversation, this leads some, including many of us, many Unitarian Universalists, to conclude that when it comes right down to it, Unitarian Universalism is so wide open, so inclusive, and so free that we lack anything resembling shared truth. In Unitarian Universalism, when it comes to truth, when you get down to it, it's basically every person for themselves. Right? No. Well, as I already tipped off, that's not how I see it. And let me tell you why. You see, in addition to sharing with the Jewish tradition an unending commitment to the search for truth, there's something else very important that Unitarian Universalism shares with Judaism. And it is this. We share with Judaism a belief in the existence and authority of a particular kind of religious truth. Truth that emerges not from a single creed, but rather from the agreements that we make with one another. You see, in both Judaism and Unitarian Universalism, truth is covenantal rather than creedal. Truth is covenantal rather than creedal. Now, when we say that Unitarian Universalism is a covenantal rather than a creedal faith, this simply means that you journey together, guided not by a single statement written in the distant past, but instead by a set of promises and agreements that we make with each other about what we believe and how we will live. That's essentially what a covenant is, a set of promises that human beings make with one another. Of course, covenants, like all agreements, are subject to review and revision. Covenants change as new ideas, new needs, and new realities emerge. But even though they are subject to change, covenants, and especially religious covenants, are affirmations of deep and profound truth. Truths that can be just as meaningful and just as important as any creed. The truth that lives in our covenants defines and shapes who we are and how we live as Unitarian Universalists. Our covenants lift up and affirm beliefs and values that guide us as people of faith. Think for a moment about what has to be the most important covenant in Unitarian Universalism today. The covenant that affirms our 7 Unitarian Universalist principles. I'm sure you've all seen these before. Many of you have, unless you're first-timers to UU. Here they are. These are the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. And these principles, these 7 principles, are a reflection of who we are at this point in time in our history as Unitarian Universalists. They emerged out of a long and inclusive dialogue among UUs. This dialogue happened in the late 1970s and into the early and mid-1980s. A dialogue that explored our most deeply held beliefs and convictions. And these 7 principles are reviewed from time to time, and they have been amended and changed, mostly added to. There originally were 6. The 7th one, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, was added a few years later. But while the content of these principles will undoubtedly change in the future, I think it's fair to say that today they serve as an affirmation of our deepest truths and convictions and as a stirring call to live our lives as a shared journey rooted in those things we believe and value most. And you can see them right there. The dignity and worth of every person. Love and compassion, freedom and justice in human relations. And not just love and compassion and freedom and justice for some, but for all people and for our planet. So here's my challenge for all of you. The next time you find yourself having one of those conversations about, religion, and you don't run the other way, or what church you attend, I hope you'll keep in mind and maybe share something about our approach to an understanding of religious truth. I know, believe me, I know that summing up Unitarian Universalism in a sentence or two, the so-called, elevator speech, is never easy. And of course, the reason it isn't is because we don't have a creed. We embrace the complexity and the diversity and the dynamism of life. But don't mistake our lack of a creed for an absence of truth or conviction. We have beliefs. We have convictions. We have deep and lasting truths. Of course, the truths we affirm today may someday change, and they are never carved in stone. But as people of faith, we find meaning and inspiration in the journey those principles challenge and inspire us to make. A journey that calls us to listen, to learn, and to grow. And a journey that challenges us to build a world that is free and fair and just, not only for ourselves, but for the whole human family. Those are our truths. Those are our principles. Those are our values. I hope you'll proclaim them loudly and boldly. And may they always bring us meaning and purpose, hope and joy this day and every day. Blessed be, and thank you for listening. So that's the truth.